Okay, Chair Martin, the devices are rolling and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the May 18th, 2021 meeting of the City of Morro Bay's Citizens Oversight Committee, acting as the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee. It's 3 p.m. and we'll do roll call. Barbara Spagnola.
Sorry, here.
Okay. Homer Alexander.
Here.
Bart Beckman.
Present.
Lois Johnson.
Present.
Stephen Peck.
Here.
Tina Weiner is not with us today. She already sent me an email saying she wouldn't be able to attend, and sent that to Dana. And I'm John Martin. So we have 6 of us here. We have a quorum. So let's proceed with the meeting. Are there any committee member announcements or presentations? Okay, seeing none, we'll press on to the consent calendar. This is typically where we see approval of the minutes, but there aren't any this time. Katie?
We had some logistical issues in terms of having the clerk's office review them before our publishing deadline, and so you will see both this meeting and last meetings at your next meeting.
Okay, thank you. And now for the business items. Item 1, brief finance director update. Katie?
Thank you, Chair and committee members. I have the distinct honor of informing you of a great award that we received. It's the highest award for budgets that we can receive from the Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA. We received notification yesterday that we received it for last year's budget. So I want to give my kudos to the group that was involved in that, which I was not, for the awesome work that was done to achieve that great honor. And I'll look forward to hearing from my successor that this year's model has done the same. So just wanted to give a shout out to the CPAC for your role in making sure that the budget is accurate and reflects the values of the community, as well as obviously the council and the staff. It's a big effort, and so it takes a village, and this is representation that our village is working together carefully and collaboratively. And so I just wanted to send my thanks to all of the staff who had a role in it, as well as just make sure the committee and the council and the community knows about the good work that's being done at City Hall and at the other city facilities. And then I did want to turn it over to Scott Collins, who also has another announcement for the committee.
Yeah, just a brief update on the recruitment for the Administrative Services Director / Assistant City Manager. As the committee will recall, we converted the Finance Director position into that. And we've done a recruitment, had over 30 applications, and had interview panels. And Barbara Spagnola represented your committee quite well on that panel, on the community panel, as well as there was a city manager panel that looked at the individuals, including Jen Calloway, serving on that committee for us. So well represented, good folks, and we down to finalists, and hopefully have an announcement on the appointment later this week. So I'll make sure that you all receive that as soon as that information goes out. Thanks again, Barbara, for doing that.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure, and all of the candidates were very impressive, quite honestly. So thank you for that opportunity.
And that concludes the staff's presentation.
So Katie, any idea how long you'll be with us?
That's part of the negotiations being negotiated between Scott and the new person and the California Public Employees Retirement System, because I certainly don't want to put that at my personal retirement at risk. So it's still unclear, but it's very likely to be very close to the time that the new person starts.
Well, I'm just thinking that our next meeting isn't until August. Will we have a chance to say goodbye?
Not officially in the meeting. I will not be here until August. I can 110% assure you of that.
So this is our opportunity to say goodbye.
It is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. You have really filled some big shoes, and really appreciate the hard work you've done and good work you've done.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that acknowledgement.
Okay, so I guess we'll move on to the next item, B2, which is a discussion and input on Measure Q and E fiscal year 2021-22 draft proposed budget. And you sure had a flurry of questions that the committee submitted to you. So and you did
to the test, that's for sure.
You did return those with answers on most everything about an hour ago. I hope everybody had a chance to read through those, but it's up to the committee members if we have to address any of those live here at the meeting, or if those answers are sufficient. So I'll just turn it over to you, Katie, and let you lead the way there.
Perfect. I have a quick presentation that shouldn't take very long, and then since the committee's already seen this item, we definitely have the ability to give you some updated information. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually escape out of this, stop sharing for a second, and just bring this presentation over to my other screen so that you don't see my ear the whole time. That I can. Okay, so I will go ahead and share again. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do the presentation really quickly. Most of it is very similar to the presentation that was presented at the last meeting in April. These are the adopted principles that the council requested that the funding be aligned with. It encompasses everything that's associated with Measure Q and Measure E. And so we've tried to align that. And as part of the questions, I put together a chart that tried to bring together all of the information, which is the project, the purpose, the funding, and the parts of the principles that were being met specifically related to either Measure Q or Measure E or both. Just to refresh everybody's memory, this is all part of the process that the council adopted. It also is reflecting that we're accounting for this in one fund. I have found out since our last meeting that we will be receiving one payment from the state for all of our Measure Q and Measure E money. So there's no way to distinguish. So the way that it's distinguished in the budget is 1/3 coming from Measure Q and 2/3 of the estimate coming from Measure E. But just so you know, there is no way to really distinguish between the two pots of money based on what the state Department of Taxation has told me. Again, this is a reflection of the purpose and use. Again, Committee Member Peck started us down this road, which I think is a really good addition to being able to articulate the connectivity between the spending and the purpose of the measure that is associated with the spending. So this is the chart that I mentioned. It has I'll just read off the first item, which is police department staffing. It is funding 1 sergeant and 2 police officers. And when I get down to fire, I'll just explain the difference between the last CFAC's recommendation and why we made the change that we did. So it includes a brief explanation of the purpose of the particular project that's being funded, the amount that's being funded, and then here on the right-hand column is either the measure Q or measure E purpose. In the material that I sent out to you earlier today, it's color-coded to Q being purple and E being green. And on here, I just had a tough time making the colors work as well with this background. So that is not as readily apparent when I present to the City Council. I'll make sure that the color coding carries on to the presentation. So this includes police department staffing, fire department staffing, and consolidated maintenance staffing. I mentioned that we changed our recommendation. The CFAC had recommended that it be 2 police officers and 1 sergeant and 1 engineer, paramedic, and 2 captains. In order for there to be parity between the 2 public safety departments, we are proposing that it include 2 police officers, 2 engineer firefighters or paramedics, and 1 supervisor each. So a sergeant in the police department and a captain in the fire department. So that's why there's some differentiation between the last presentation, this presentation, and the recommendation from the CFAC that we heard. Then we go on to staffing in the harbor department, which is associated with the lifeguard program. The Public Works Engineering CIP implementation resource is not a staffing exclusively item. I mentioned in the response to questions, this is a pool of $175,000 that is intended for the new Public Works Director to be able to design how we could achieve greater timeliness and efficiency using these resources. It may turn into FTE or it may turn into consulting dollars, but that he's on his 2nd week of employment with the city, and so that's still to be determined. If it does turn into the staffing model that he wants to pursue, then he would need to go back to the City Council and request that FTE be added to the budget. Again, we didn't know what this design was going to be, and so there are no full-time equivalent positions associated with this particular request. The records management system for the police department is one that is required in order to be the bridge to the sheriff's office, if you will. This is a one-time cost, and the additional dollars are associated with the ongoing expense. So it's $98,000 and some change, and it turns into an ongoing obligation of $19,470. I just want to take a pause here because we skipped the general public input. And so, Dana, do we need to stop here and do that? Scott? I'm just going to keep going until I get The police department report dictation system is another efficiency measure that would help police officers write reports by their voice as opposed to having to type them into the machine. Again, the $11,000 is the one time, and there is a small ongoing expense associated with it that I don't remember off the top of my head, but I believe that it's in the budget book. The fire station debt is through the Department of Agriculture. This amount is increased by 10% so that we can get to a 10% reserve. And I believe that after this year, there will be a small amount that needs to be dedicated to it, but this amount should come down to a certain extent in the next year. I do want to highlight that both this financing and some other financing that is in front of the city has significant increases in costs in 2025. And so I'm going to recommend to the next director that he or she definitely try to, excuse me, think about refinancing that debt because it will go up substantially. And as does the solar energy. Let me take 1 minute and take a drink of water. Thank you. I'm sorry, I thought I was hydrated. So that's for this year. We're fine for next year and then the year after that, but somebody's going to need to be looking at this in order to make it sure that it's affordable for the long term. The replacement of the fire engine. This is we responded to a question about when this is the debt is paid off. I believe that it's not this coming year, but it might be the next year. I'd have to look at the responses to the questions. The consolidated maintenance truck is very straightforward. It's got 150,000 miles on it. The Harbor Patrol firefighting system replacement, the Harbor Patrol garbage disposal. This and the sidewalk pavement, the sidewalk replacement, I may have made it a little bit more confusing than it needed to be. The sidewalk replacement is in various locations. The solid waste disposal is down on the waterfront and on the Embarcadero. Storm drain maintenance and repairs, because of the shifting of dollars, there's $314,000 coming from measure Q and E. For this particular project, the general fund is making up the difference associated with doing $600,000 worth of that maintenance. Pavement management system is $850,000, and part of that is associated with carryover dollars that weren't spent this year, as well as SB1, which is the state bond measure that's associated with transportation. We're continuing to make contributions to, or we are making a contribution or proposing to make a contribution to the general fund emergency reserve, $125,000. And then the street and intersection improvements at Route 1, Main Street, and State Route 46 is included in the proposed budget at $600,000. I included the by department dollars, which there are some differences between the overall chart of expenditures and this, just to try to give you a sense of how much is being invested in each of the departments. And so the key question for CFAC today is, do you have any further input or feedback on the proposed measure Q and E uses to present for council consideration? or did we do a fantastic job of interpreting all of your feedback from the last meeting and you're ready to give it 2 thumbs up?
Katie, thank you for your presentation, and thank you for reminding me about the public comment period. I missed that. I apologize. Anthony, do we have anyone in the queue who wanted to ask some general questions or make general comments to the committee?
Thank you, Chair. I do see one hand raised in the queue, Carol Truesdale. I'm going to go ahead and unmute her.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Carol, welcome.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Katie, thank you very much for the presentation. I've watched the disbursement of funds between the Morro Bay Police Department and the Fire Department, and I've known year after year that more goes to the Fire Department than the Police Department. And I'd like to understand how this comes about, because both of them are critical assets to the city of Morro Bay and the saving of lives. So can someone give me, maybe Mr. Collins, you can ascertain why there's such a, like $300,000 this go around. It's a lot of money. So, Chief Knuckles, your retirement, so I won't probably see you before you do your retirement or something like that, but I want to wish you a good retirement. So understanding for me as a citizen, when you look at the numbers, why is there such a big difference between one department and another when they're equally geared towards the safety of citizens?
Would you mind if I speak to that, a little bit of history, reason why? And the main reason why is when Measure Q got passed, the department was in very disrepair. We didn't have a fire station. We had apparatus that were way out of date, and we could not respond to about 20% of our calls because we didn't have enough staffing. So when Measure Q was finally approved and we went through the process, it was majority of the funding of Measure Q at that time. We went to the fire department to increase our staffing, fund the fire station, and get our apparatus up and running. And so the difference between what's going on with PD with Measure E and Measure Q is that a large proportion of Measure Q in the past has gone towards the fire department to maintain our 2 in, 2 out and able to respond to 100% of our calls because 14 to 20% of our calls are simultaneous. And when you have 2 medical aids going at once, we like to get paramedics there at the same time. Hope I answered the question on that.
I've been here since '95, so I do understand, the history behind it. So, but it just seems to me that you've got a fabulous fire station department and a new things coming on the horizon that I think the funds should be a little bit more. The Morro Bay Police Department has been struggling for several years in funding, and so that was just a question that I wanted to ask, and thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you, Carol. Scott, did you have anything to add to that, or is that enough?
I think Chief Knuckles answered it pretty well. The Measure Q is evolved over time, but those initial kind of costs were part of the plan when Measure E was launched, and before it became Measure Q, was really to help solidify that simultaneous call and get the structure built. And so there's that 12th position, if you will, hasn't gone away. The need is still there to be able to do simultaneous calls, and we're still paying off the fire station. So, but I think we've made up some of the gap that Ms. Truesdale identified with Measure E funds. So again, I think between Measure EQ and our general fund recovering, we're able to provide our full array of police and fire services to the community, and we feel really good about that.
Thank you, Scott. And for other members of the public, and also Carol, who may be online here, we will have an opportunity under each item for the public to comment or ask questions. So hopefully I won't forget to do that. So in regards to Katie's presentation, first we'll start with any questions, clarifying questions that we have for her. We'll start with Barbara.
No, I'm happy with the report and the thoroughness of it. I appreciate the last minute attention to detail with all the questions answered, and also in response to the citizen Carol's request. I think sometimes it's a misconception that all of these Measure Q funds initially are to be equally divided among police, fire, and other storm drains. And also, we had 2 loans on that. The second loan on the fire station has been paid off, but the first one was 15 years. So we're still well into that loan. So I think when you look at that and what Chief said and Scott on the 4-person, that pretty much answers it. And the only other question I had on that one, Katie, was, has there been any progress on the sale of the Cloisters product property? Because that's also going to go to pay down the fire station debt, which would leave more money for another Measure Q concern.
Thank you. I apologize. Just as I'm getting ready to walk off into the sunset, I'll probably get this mute thing right. My understanding is that there are still ongoing conversations and there's still a relationship. I'm glad that Mr. Graham just popped up on my screen, and I'm happy to let him respond.
Thank you, Katie. So yes, we've entered into a extended purchase agreement with them to allow them to continue the processing of their application for the 5-lot subdivision, at which point, once they are entitled and through the appeal period, that property would close.
Perfect. Thank you for the response.
Sure.
Me too.
Thank you, Barbara. Let's go to Bart. Any questions, Bart?
Yes. Well, I basically have a lot of concerns about the roundabout, including the one that wasn't answered in one of the questions about the right-of-way by the Chevron property, and learning from how the Worf land acquisition went from 400,000 to 1.8 million. We probably are underestimating that. That being said, that while I don't necessarily agree with the project, I'd love to make a motion to say hold off on that. What I would like to make a motion on, and that is that we don't proceed, that this council does not approve the 600,000 unless they identify where the source of funding is going to come from for the balance of the project, which is, let's say, around 4 million, something like that. At the meeting last time, I didn't particularly appreciate the way it was phrased, but basically it was something to the extent that once the 600,000 is spent, if we don't go ahead with the rest of it, we would have washed away the 600,000, sort of putting the gun to our head down the road. Point being, I'd like to make a motion that the council not include the 600,000 unless a source of funding for the balance of the project is identified. Now, if that be from Measure E, I'm not going to sit here and argue that, but I think that the city needs to have an appreciation for what's happening, and that's a lot of additional money, presumably coming out of Measure E or somewhere.
Okay, Bart, thank you. Let's hold your motion until everybody had a chance to ask their questions. Okay, so do you have any other questions for Katie?
That's all. Thanks, John.
Okay, thank you. Homer, did you have more questions?
Yes. I was under the impression at our last meeting, we approved a motion to trade the engineers' personnel costs for additional PD or fire department personnel costs. Since there's no discussion in any of the literature that was sent by the city or the campaign committee or anybody else that the additional tax would fund salaries and engineering salaries. That's one point. The other one is that when that lot closes on San Jacinto and Highway 1, I would think that would be the ideal time to refinance that loan. And finally, I agree with Bart completely. And one of the things that I asked for in my notes to Katie regarding this meeting was a more in-depth discussion about this 141 financing. It really concerns me that the city will have invested a lot of money, and where is the $4.1 million going to come from? And I think we need to all, at least I need to feel a lot more comfortable about that. But I'm really basically on the same page as with Bart regarding that subject, and I'm hoping that during the next item that this thing is addressed, that the funding is addressed for this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Homer. Katie, did you want to address Homer's first question about the personnel, the engineering personnel?
Yes, we did take out the engineering tech and the additional staff person in Public Works, the environmental programs manager position. I did not interpret the motion to exclude all funding to achieve capital improvement projects, including streets and other projects that are being funded by Measure Q and E. Not necessarily that there's a direct linkage, but we can see by the challenges that we've had getting those projects on the street, bid, and built, that we have a backlog of projects that need to be supported by the project staff in our engineering team. And we didn't want to propose to you specific positions at this point because of the new director coming on board. And so I would just say that if that was the intent, I didn't understand it that way. And so we definitely took out the engineering tech, which is now funded in the general fund, and we took out the environmental programs manager position being funded out of Measures Q and E, but we did leave in the most directly related costs associated with achieving the objectives of Measure Q and Measure E.
Thank you, Katie. Let's go to Lois next. Lois, any more questions for Katie?
Just a couple of things. One is that there's in the description parity between the police department and the fire department FTEs, but in looking at the detail, you can see that the fire department FTEs with overtime, part-time pay exceed that of what is going to the police department. That looks to me to be a good part of it, as well as the debt service, which is separately identified. And then with respect to the 141 roundabout, if memory serves, there is a proposed development of an apartment building not far from that intersection. I could be wrong, but that's my memory. And if that's the case, should the developer be responsible for bearing some of the cost of improvements to that intersection?
Okay, I'm going to go with the first question first about the difference between the police department and the fire department in terms of raw numbers of dollars. One of the challenges, or one of the reasons for the differential, is because through the federal law, the federal FLSA, the overtime law, because of the work schedules that the fire department work, there is an absolute requirement for the city to pay overtime to firefighters based on their regular schedule. And then in addition to that, Chief Knuckles has done an exhaustive examination of the history of how many shifts typically a firefighter works in a year. And so there's pretty substantial difference between the cost of those positions that are on parity with each other in total. So when I was referring to parity, I was referring to two-line employees who provide direct service to the community and 1 supervisor, not necessarily a dollar for dollar match. And so that's where my...
Yeah, thank you. I understood that. I just thought it was worth pointing out that that's what happens there when you get to looking at the detail. And I understand that. Thank you.
Yeah. And then I'm going to ask, phone a friend and ask Scott Graham to talk to the question about the responsibilities of a property developer.
Absolutely, Katie. Sure, that project was at 405 Atascadero Road. It's the Haslow Affordable Housing Project. And they are conditioned to provide their fair share of funds towards the construction of that intersection. Unfortunately, it's a small amount compared to the overall amount of traffic that goes through that intersection, but they are conditioned to provide their share based on a traffic analysis and traffic study for the project.
Okay, thank you, which probably is a small amount compared to the 4.1 million that the city would be responsible to pay.
Correct.
Okay, Lois, thank you. Stephen, let's go to you.
Thank you. First, thank you, Katie, for your service and commitment to the community. I know we've received lots of comments on the expenditure funds overall, with a couple exceptions. I'm pretty happy with how the funds have been allocated to police, fire, capital, and the harbor department. We're certainly meeting some urgent needs there. There are a couple comments that I want to build on from my colleagues. The first one has to do with the 141 and being kind of in that business. I'm not opposed to improving roads. What I'm concerned about is what Bart and Homer said, is that we spend another $600,000 without knowing whether we have enough money to build it. For me, compounding that is the fact that the city hasn't completed its master plan for the power plant property. And it's that traffic that's driving the need for it long term. And that the traffic study for the general plan says even after we do this, the intersection is going to fail. It's going to go to an F. So I'm not even sure we have the right solution to solve the longer term problem. My gut tells me that we've overestimated trips in the general plan, and maybe this is the right solution, but our technical documents don't say that. So I would be supportive of what Bart discussed about authorizing this amount for strategic purposes to get plans on the shelf, but there needs to be a realistic plan for funding the balance. I'm all for projects like this, but I'm not for spending $600,000 plus the bulk of whatever is remaining out of Q&E. And that kind of leads to my second request that perhaps Katie and Scott can take to heart and take to the council, is that I think would help us tremendously if not only with the council policies, but how we believe we're committing funds going forward. We aren't just committing to 2 or 3 firefighters this year. We're committing to them for a long period of time, unless I'm mistaken. We are spending $20 to $30 million today, or council will. And so I'd like a better perspective on how those commitments lay out in the future as we expect sales tax dollars to come in, so we know what's committed and what's not committed. One of my comments on the capital budget is that one of the pavement management budgets actually had $500,000 a year for pavement management in the out years. That may not be a bad thing, but we don't have a long-term cash flow plan to show what we think are kind of basic expenditures and kind of what's left over. That's a real missing piece for me. So that if we come down the road, figuratively and literally, and find out we want to spend a couple $1 million on the 141 interchange, we know there's a gap there that we can do it. I don't see that in the budget right now. I don't seriously object to the money we're spending, except for the 141 money. But that would be very helpful, I think, for staff and for council and for us to figure out how much money we're going to have left after we've made these initial commitments in these years. I had other comments, but I think Katie answered them adequately.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Katie, I just had a couple of questions about the transfer from Measure E to the General Fund Emergency Reserve. And I guess first question I would have is, if it turned out that by June 30th of 2022, the General Fund Emergency Reserve was actually going to exceed the 28% target, would you still transfer that $125,000?
The way that I've been looking at it is that we're restoring and then building to meet the target amount. So while it's projection at this point, I would say no, you wouldn't need to make that contribution to the GFER from Measure E and Q. That also makes the assumption that given our current experience and this most recent year's past experience, whether, there's a commonly held belief that 28% is the right number. But given the current policy, the short answer would be no.
Okay. And then the other thing about the transfer is, would it be possible just to go ahead and pay off that fire engine loan and then do the balance as a transfer to just get rid of that loan? I mean, it doesn't make much sense to me that here the general fund loaned money to Measure Q.
Yep.
And now Measure Q/E is going to be transferring money into the general fund while the loan is still there.
Yep.
It just doesn't make any sense to me. It seems like you would get rid of the loan first.
Yeah. So the short answer is yes. And I'm looking for the question. It was a good question, and I responded to it that yes, you could do that, and then there'd be some amount left over that you could either contribute to the General Fund Emergency Reserve or put it towards something else.
Okay, so I would sure recommend that. I think it simplifies things, but
yeah.
In any event, okay, those are two things I had. So let's go back to Bart. Bart, I wrote down, but I don't think I got exactly what you said. I just wrote down that your motion was to postpone the $600,000 expenditure for engineering work on the Highway 41-1 Main Street roundabout until, and then I missed the rest of it. What is the condition you're looking for until?
I don't mind deferring to Homer on the wording. He's much better at this, but it was basically until the full source of funding is identified.
Okay, so the motion is to postpone the $600,000 expenditure for engineering work on the 41-1 Main roundabout until the full source of funding is identified. Homer, you have your hand up.
As I mentioned earlier, I had asked that this item be sort of carved out in the budget since it was part of the capital. I realized that it could be in either this agenda item or the next one. But I'd like to hear what the staff is prepared to address the issue that I wrote them about prior to voting for Bart's motion.
So I think I'm going to ask Mr. Lilac.
Well, that might not be okay. I mean, it's up to John.
I'm not clear on what you're asking for. Oh, I'm sorry.
Staff response? Yeah, we can do that if you want to.
Yeah, I'm just asking for, hopefully, that somebody in the staff has got some ideas on where the 4.1 million is going to come from in the next 24 months.
Yeah, happy to do that if the chair wants us to do that.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's a fair point raised by Board Member Alexander Meckman. And I think we can't give certainty to it, but I think we can shed a little bit more light on it. and Rob can fill in the blanks. We've been blessed by the fact that, Caltrans supports the roundabout as the preferred alternative because it gives us more life. And longer term, I guess, sustainability on that intersection, which is a very challenging one. During morning pickups and drop-offs, in the afternoon, the same at the high school, as well as the growing number of tourists that are coming to our town, what pressures that create at that intersection. So we have had success through SLOCOG in securing, about $4 million for the project from various sources. And it's at the point where if there isn't a commitment made by the city to help complete the design portion of the project, that those funds will be relinquished to other projects in the county, and we'll never see those funds again. And our opportunity to get this project done will probably pass by. There is a bit of a risk, of course, in putting city's money down on this, and it's something I take seriously. Rob, myself, a couple of council members have talked with SLOCOG and Caltrans staff about that very issue. And while they can't make promises, they're very keyed in on getting projects done. I think there's been criticism, well taken, that, like what we experience sometimes here, we have a lot of plans and we can't get a lot done. And so they're really trying to focus in on getting things done. And so their interest is to see this move forward. Again, no guarantees, but the idea is that they would match the remaining gap in the for the planning portion of the project, that they would meet us 1-for-1. And then the remaining gap, which would be, $3.5 to $4 million in construction, that they would try to meet us 1-for-1, which means we're looking at potentially up to another $2 million. There's a lot of different ways to fund that. It doesn't all have to be paid for at once. Obviously, Measure EQ could be a source. The general fund could be a source. Additional federal dollars that we could seek through the earmark process could be portions of that. We could take out loans on other state funds that we have. There's a number of ways we can get at this. Clearly, we'd love to be able to provide you hard in-depth analysis on that, but simply haven't had the time. And by onboarding our new public works director, sorry, I haven't introduced Greg Fogg to the group. Working with Rob, we'd probably be able to get more certainty around that soon. But SLOCOG is looking for that commitment during this fiscal year, the upcoming one, that the city's actually going to put city money on the line so that they'll feel confident making that recommendation to their board for them to do the same thing and then see it through, that we can do a 50-50 on the construction dollars. So, Rob, am I fairly characterizing what we heard from the team?
I think that's what we heard in several meetings from SLOCOG staff and Caltrans, that they'll work with us to recommend. They are staff also. They would recommend to their board to provide additional funding for the project. I guess I can guarantee one thing, that if we don't complete the pre-construction work, the design, preparation of the plan specs, estimates, the PA and ED, the project authorization, and environmental determination, we can never deliver this project. One example of a project that was funded in Morro Bay because we had the design complete was the Morro Creek Bridge and Bike Path. The Bob Jones Trail wasn't ready to proceed. They had funding dedicated to that project that was moved to our project because our project did have plans completed and it was ready to list, advertised for bid. So not that we hope that other agencies fail to deliver, but there is that is another potential source of funding for a project. If you deliver design, you have a chance of getting outside funding. If you do not complete design, I can almost guarantee that the SLOCOG staff will not recommend any additional funding for this project.
I get the threats we had the last month. What is it $2 million or $4 million that we're talking about here?
There's a funding gap of $4 million to deliver the project. SLOCOG staff would recommend that if we complete design, that they add another half to that $4 million to leave the funding gap for us to deliver $2 million. Their board has not voted to do that. That's just their staff's recommendation.
Well, Scott gets the big bucks. If he wants to bite the bullet and say he's going to basically bet that we'll get the other $2 million and then have some recommendation, worst case scenario, we take this out of Measure E. But I think there's got to be a proposed plan of how we're going to do this with some possibilities, I realize. But we've got to be transparent on what the possibilities are here. I asked the question very directly in my question, how much are we on the hook for? What's the best case scenario, worst case scenario? And there wasn't any answer. Now we're hearing, I guess it's 2 million, which is much better than 4. But I'd say go ahead. I'm still saying a recommendation needs to go to the council as to what your best shot is as to what this is going to cost. And what if they don't come up with the other 2 million? Where do you get the 4? And if it's only 2, where do you get the 2 from? And if it's from Measure E, so be it. But let's be transparent on what might happen.
Okay, Bart. So we have a motion on the floor.
Can I say something, John?
Can we get a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay. So let's have some discussion. Go ahead, Homer.
Well, first place, I'm looking at in the capital projects budget, page I11, which is the detail of this interchange, and with the $600,000, the city will have already spent or will spend a total of $821,000. So that's one point, which is something that the city would potentially eat if the money doesn't come forward for the $4 million. Remind everybody that SLOCOG, if I'm not mistaken, is a semi-political organization, and what their staff would recommend and what their board, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, are the elected officials in San Luis Obispo County, they may have other ideas and other priorities. So until their board actually votes on it, I'm not sure that how much you can really hang your hat on 2 versus 4. Those are the only comments I want to make.
John, you're muted.
All right. Any further discussion? Steve, did you have more input?
Yeah. When is SLOCOG supposed to take their action, matching the design and possibly construction? Is that imminent, or?
It's this upcoming funding cycle. Is that in August, September, Rob? I forget. Maybe it's a little bit further down the line this year, but it's in this calendar year, correct?
It's in this calendar year. I believe it's toward the end of the calendar year when they actually vote on the RTIP, the Regional Transportation Improvement Plan.
So theoretically, if we want to advance this, we could say we recommend the $600,000 to get something shovel ready, subject to the additional money from SLOCOG for the balance of the design, subject to a financing plan that would go along with it, and that might balance it out. So that way we'd know who's in and who's out, and if SLOCOG isn't in, then there's no sense in us going forward unless we want to come back and reappropriate additional money.
Thank you, Steve. Lois, I noticed you're unmuted. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was wondering how long the study is valid. So if we weren't in the award for the coming cycle, how many attempts do we get?
That's a good question. I don't know how to answer that other than I think the best I can do is say that if the city isn't we have to commit to the funds now to meet the deadlines. I mean, commit to it this year to meet the planning deadlines, right, Rob? But otherwise, I think it all washes out.
Yeah, otherwise, SOCOG will recommend that the commitment for half the funding go to other more viable projects in the county.
Okay,
Just a point on timing. Like I said, we're in the PAED phase, the project authorization environmental review. Likely that won't be complete until spring of next year. We wouldn't start design until probably the end of the fourth quarter is when that, if we were to authorize the $600,000, when the spend would start on that.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Barbara, anything?
No.
Okay, thank you. Well, my concern is not so much with the funding, although that is really critical, but my main concern is the issue that Steve brought up in regards to the project just not really fixing the problem. I mean, the general plan study showed that even with the roundabout in place, you still don't have a level of service that is adequate. And it looks to me like as long as there's those northbound Highway 1 on and off ramps, there's no way to build a roundabout at that location that meets the need. So I just don't understand how the project would go forward knowing that.
Yeah, I think there's two things. One was the analysis done on the project, and the other is the general plan, which assumes maximum build out, which is sort of, I don't want to say worst case or best case scenario, but just an extreme case where everything that could be developed is developed. And that certainly creates a different number of car trips than what the analysis was done for the project itself, which is probably more of a realistic analysis. Is that correct, Rob?
Yeah, so the design engineers that are working on the project used Caltrans's methodology for and the regional transportation model for predicting what the traffic would be in that intersection. From my understanding, and Scott Graham may be able to help us here, the circulation element traffic study assumed build out and redevelopment to the maximum extent of every parcel that's underdeveloped or undeveloped in Morro Bay, plus complete build out of the existing wastewater treatment plant and the power plant property.
Yeah, the two biggest contributing factors are the last two things that you said, Rob, and that's the build out of the power plant site and the current wastewater treatment plant site. But you never ever really get that maximum development number, but we're required to look at sort of like what Scott said, the worst case scenario when it comes to traffic impacts. Both the draft general plan includes requirements for, as those things be developed, the master plans are done. Master plans will evaluate the infrastructure requirement needs and circulation needs associated with what the build out will be. And we'll have a better idea, when those master plans come forward. We'll know what we need to do a little more clearly at that point. The general plan is, again, general, and it sort of kind of looks at the broad what could possibly happen, and that's what's evaluated in the EIR that's associated with that.
John, I started my comments by a caveat that basically said I'm not real comfortable with the design itself, with cars going north on one going 70 miles an hour, slowing down to enter into a roundabout with high school kids with their earbuds on walking across the street. If you look at the roundabout at South Bay Boulevard, it's tough enough for people to figure out what to do without worrying about a bunch of high school kids. And no offense, I was one of those who probably had 8,000 other things on my mind, walking across, 3 or 4 lanes you got to go across. I am supportive of something needs to be done there. It's a bad intersection. So if you want to amend what I said by fundamentally questioning the design, I'm all for that.
think we have a motion, we have a second, so I think that's an appropriate thing to vote on. Is there any further discussion on this item? So the motion is to postpone the $600,000 expenditure for engineering work on the 41-1 Main Street roundabout until a full source of funding for the project is identified. Is that okay, Bart?
That's fine. I'm not trying to stop it. I'm just trying to say that the range of possibilities, and it sounds like it's 2 to 4 million, and quite likely, if I were to guess, the 8.4 is going to be 10 before we're done. But what's the possibility of the cost that we're going to have to come up with, and where might those funds come from? And if it's Measure E, it's Measure E. And there's other possibilities, but the city council has to bite the bullet and say, if they're going to spend the money, they're going to have to come back, or some other council is going to have to come back and say, okay, now how do we come up with the rest of the money?
Okay, and that may be an element of the report that the staff would do, or they may just totally ignore us, who knows, but in any event, that is the motion, and I believe, Homer, that is what you seconded. So let's go ahead and take the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so the motion passes 6-0 to 1 absent. Okay. Any more discussion on this item? Measure Q, Measure E. I think we need to have public input on this before we leave it. So, Anthony, is there anyone raising their hand?
Thank you, Chair. I do not see any raised hands in the queue.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, let's move on then to item B3, which is a discussion and input on the draft proposed 2021-22 operating budget. Katie?
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen again. Oops. So I skipped over the pretty picture. It is a very pretty picture that's on the front of the budget. And big thanks, shout out to Tracy in our office who does that work for us. City Council adopted goals and objectives were really the umbrella that we used to make some decisions about things, staffing, supplies, expenses, capital investments that are to be made that are proposed in the coming budget. And so those include achieving financial and economic sustainability, improving public infrastructure, including the WRF and the One Water Plan, updating the city's land use plans and addressing affordable housing, improving community outreach and engagement, and a temporary one that addresses responding to the public health emergency. Those have been the guiding light for the city for the past 2 years, for the first 4, and then the last one in the last year. And so thematically, we would suggest to you that this budget represents resiliency and rebounding from an unexpected and a precedent-setting year in terms of the changes, the challenges, and ultimately the revival that we're feeling right now. All funds are healthy. Measure Q and Measure E are providing new opportunities, as is cannabis revenue. We're making investments on the goals and objectives that include staffing, equipment replacement, services, capital improvements, financial and economic sustainability, and grant funds for the next general plan implementation. We're able to restore a number of things that are related to community engagement and trying to achieve serving the most in need in our community through the restoration of our grant giving funding. And then we are planning to replenish the general fund emergency reserve. This gives you a picture of, and this is the same documentation that's in the budget, of overall the city's revenues. The internal services funds are very small. The capital budget is particularly large this coming year due to the amount of money that will be spent on the water reclamation facility. Overall, our revenues will be $148.3 million, and they are on an upward trajectory. Now, again, I would be careful about how you look at this, because this makes an assumption that we're going to be spending a little more than $88 million on the water reclamation facility, the WRF. And so as that line in the chart that looks like it's going up precipitously, it will come back down as well. Probably not next year, but the year after that, it will definitely come down. So this is expenditures by fund. So this is a citywide presentation. And compared to the revenues, we'll be making expenditures close to $145.8 million. And again, it's spread between the general fund, the special revenue funds, internal service funds, enterprise funds, and capital funds. You'll see that we're planning to spend $94.3 million in capital expenditures over the next year. And again, that does include $88+ million going to the WRF. So it's drilling down on the general fund, we will have a proposed budget that includes both general fund revenues of $14.3 million plus contributions from other funds to pay for the services provided by the general fund of $1.2 million for a total of $15,554,000. That gives us a differential between our revenues and expenditures of $32,000, which is razor thin. But we think that it's a prudent budget that really doesn't overestimate revenues and is realistic on its expenditures. You'll also note that in this slide down at the bottom, it's representing what we are estimating to potentially be a surplus of $1.4 million. One of the challenges that we're facing is that in terms of knowing, we're annualizing some revenues that have rebounded, such as transient occupancy tax or the hotel bed tax. We're making some estimates about some additional revenues from the second cannabis retail outlet, which just opened for the last 19 days of April. And so we are trying to be realistic about revenues, but we again have annualized. And so our recommendation to the council is that you wait until the end of the fiscal year and the books are closed and you see what that number actually is before taking any action to move that to the general fund emergency reserve. But that's what our recommendation will be, is that once the books close, that amount be set to the general fund emergency reserve. On the expenditure side, you can see that we have included in our expenditure funds quite a number of increases to our departments. That was made possible by the investments of Measure Q and E funds to cover police and fire and some consolidated maintenance staff members. In total, the expenditure budget is scheduled to be $14.2 million with the debt payments and the transfers out. and the transfers out are going into other funds that are required to make sure that we're paying for services that we receive, or we're paying for the services in the correct internal service fund. So we're buying vehicles out of the vehicle replacement fund as appropriate. And so that totals $15.52 million. The chart on the top, the pie chart is broken out by departments, and you can see that in this particular case, the police department is 26%, administration, which covers a variety of departments, is 22%, including the contract services department, which is where we pay for dispatch for police and fire services and things like that. And so it's really a non-departmental expense. So that's why administration looks the way it does. The fire department being 18%. And again, this does not reflect the total expenditure for those services, because the policy decision was made to purchase those services, if you will, or pay for those services out of Measure Q and Measure E fund. We will work to see if we can come up with a total dollar amount that is projected to be spent by each department between now and the time that we make the presentation to the council for the adoption of the budget in June. This is an overall general fund emergency reserve. Basically, we're projecting for the end of next fiscal year that we will be at $3.3 million. That includes two things. One, it includes no contribution in the current year to the general fund for us to have the general fund be in balance. So at mid-year, we projected, and with the financial forecast, we budgeted or we estimated that we would be needing $671,000 from the general fund emergency reserve. We don't think that we're going to need that as a result of the cannabis money coming in as well as it is, transient occupancy tax, sales taxes coming in better. And so we feel pretty good about the fact that we won't need any contribution from the general fund emergency reserve in the current fiscal year. And that is truly a reversal of fortunes, because at the beginning of the fiscal year, we thought we were going to need $1.2 million from the general fund emergency reserve to ensure that we are have a balanced budget. The other thing that is included is the contributions from Measure Q and E, the American Rescue Plan Act Fund, and the general fund operating reserves contributions into the GFER to restore it. That's in the middle of the page here. I want to make something perfectly clear that as we were finalizing the budget, we got the first draft of the interim rules from the Department of Treasury that appears to say that the American Rescue Plan dollars cannot be used to replenish the general fund reserve. So we will have to make some assessments. We are working with our federal lobbyist. Scott is in contact with a variety of other city managers, and the concern about the reality that we used the general fund to save positions last year is not being recognized in these regulations. And so there's a move afoot, certainly, to make sure that our voices are heard at the federal level to make sure that we could use that if that's appropriate. So we may have to pivot on that. And again, it doesn't show the contribution from the general fund to the GFER if we end up the year in a positive position of revenues exceeding expenditures. In terms of positions, it's a total of a 10 increase. So we're basically going back to the spot that we were in 2018-19. It's a different type of distribution of staffing. We can certainly talk about the different types of restorations or the different additions. One of the things that you'll note here is that the recreation services has 1.75. That's because we're starting to open up our recreation services again, and we need the staff to support Kirk Carmichael, who's been pretty much a one-man show for the last 16, 17 months. And so there are revenues that come in associated with those expenditures to staff. And so while we'll be ramping up, we do need the support staff, both administrative and programmatic support staff, to help get those programs back up and operational. This is the same chart that shows in the Measure the Measure Q and E fund. So I'm not going to spend any time on that for you, but I wanted to make sure that for the public, it was highlighted that this is included in the city's budget. Again, this is the departmental expenditures for Measure Q and E. This is the expenditure plan associated with the American Rescue Plan Act. There's 2 police vehicles. We note in the budget that there's a third one that needs to be replaced. And we would recommend that the second tranche, so the city's going to get $990,000 twice. We think that they will both be in they'll be available next year. We were supposed to receive one this fiscal year and then one next fiscal year. We may end up getting both of them in the next fiscal year. So while this doesn't have the second year plan, there is some hope that there would be additional expenditures on the police vehicles and the fire command vehicles in the second year as well. Fire equipment acquisition, grounds maintenance, supplies, contractual services. This is an additional amount for sidewalks. The harbor patrol truck, backup generator for the city's general city hall, and then IT equipment replacement. We replace IT equipment on a replace as it breaks methodology, and especially given the immediate need to ensure that we can work off-site, that seems like a potential outmoded way to prepare for the next pandemic. And then, as you can see, a contribution to the GFER, which we question whether that's going to be eligible or not. So the key question for CFAC today is, do you have any feedback or input on the operating budget for the City Council to consider? The Council's next step is to have a budget study session next Tuesday at 3 o'clock, and then followed by Wednesday, so that hopefully those are the 2 days, and then we'll be back to the Council on June 22nd for budget adoption. And on that note, that concludes my presentation, unless Scott had something else he wanted to add.
Nothing to add. Thank you, Katie.
Okay, thank you, Katie. So for clarifying questions, let's start with Barbara.
No, actually, I reviewed it all, and I'm in sync with everything. I actually looked at the general fund summary expenditures based on a citizen's comment from the last 4 years. that's included in the packet, and it looks like it's about 1.5% increase per year. So I really don't think some of the issues or concerns are related to general fund expenditures. I think going up over a 4 or 5 year period, a 1.5% year increase is probably even slightly under inflation. So just want to make that comment. But thank you, Katie, for everything. I think it was very thorough and answering the questions prior to our meeting.
Thank you, Barbara. Steve, how about you?
Thank you. I agree with Barbara. You know, these documents always amaze me, and the staff that does them they're just magicians and highly skilled. I appreciate your comment, Katie, that you're going to try and come up with some sort of representation of what's being funded through the general fund and Q&E. Otherwise, it looks like some stuff is on book and some of it's off book. I think that's very helpful. Your comment had to do with the operating budget. Are you taking comments on the capital budget section at this point or not?
I'm prepared to take all comments.
Okay. My comment had to do with kind of a mixed bag of capital projects, some of which are, I would call them aspirational, they're unfunded. And we have other projects that aren't in that capital budget. And I think the response was that, well, it might be best practice to include the kitchen sink in there, funded or unfunded. In which case we probably should get everything in there with a lot of red zeros in it. Another approach would be to do a 2 to 5 year capital budget that are only those things that are clearly funded. But it appears we have a lot of storm drain projects in there that don't have any funding. We also have a lot of other projects that aren't included in there that don't have any funding, or the funding hasn't been identified. I just ask staff and council to consider picking one or the other. Is the budget really what you're going to spend money on and how it's to be financed? Or is it more of these are all the things we need and we haven't figured out how we're going to pay for them yet? So that's my ask of basically transparency. We know there's a lot of negative and zeros in there, and red zeros, but I think we have to know what that is in one format or another and comprehensively.
Let's move to Lois next.
I just want to extend a thank you to Katie. I think the package was extremely well developed. I recognize that there are many moving parts and many individuals that contribute to a budget, and I don't have any additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lois. Let's go to Bart.
Picking up with where Steve left off, and contrary to what some people might think when they see our questions, no, we didn't violate the Brown Act. There were several of us who had thoughts and comments about long-term planning for capital projects and how those would be funded going into the future. The answer to my specific question about how much is the unfunded was 15. I believe the answer is $30 to $40 million, because left out of the number was storm drains, the 141 intersection, the demolition of the plant, and there's others. So basically, we've got a large amount of money that I believe there ought to be a planning process, whether that be further 218 votes or whatever, and whether or not we set up a subcommittee. I would personally like to have a discussion with a smaller group with a new, not finance director, administrative director, and Scott to go over that. I had sent a memo to the city council suggesting that there ought to be, when you talk about plans to spend money, there should be a commensurate plan to fund that. Otherwise, you don't have a plan. So how to deal with that, John, I'm open to suggestions. It's just that I think we had a lot of unanimity in the way the questions were asked, that I think there ought to be somebody addressing at least 10 years out on how we're going to pay for this. Another one is just the water and sewer plan, how much money we're thinking we're going to spend ultimately on the wharf itself. Is it 144 or 150 million? That impacts the money available for the sewer projects. Because if we keep adding to what's going on, then all those get pushed out. But I don't necessarily want to make a motion here that we have a plan, but I would love to have this discussion with a smaller group of people.
Thank you, Bart. In regards to our work plan, that's going to be on the agenda for our August meeting, and it's going to be, I guess, coordinated with the council and the other advisory committees. Is that right, Katie?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so that discussion will happen in August, and whether or not we have a subcommittee, and if that particular issue gets added to our work plan, we'll have to see. But as of right now, it isn't, so we'll just have to wait until August. Homer, you're up.
Katie, go.
I just wanted to add that I neglected to talk about some of the things that are proposed, and one of those things that's relevant to that last discussion was funding to help be able to put that plan together. Some resources, dollars, significant dollars, I would say, $200,000 to help push that project along. I don't think that there's anybody on the staff who wants that more than Scott. He was very clear about wanting to make sure that we were moving forward with trying to put those, what I'll call master plans together, or strategic funding plans based on needs that are assessed. So I think that we're in alignment. Your staff is in alignment with the need for that, and there's funding behind getting that done in the next year or two. I also believe that that's been asked of Greg, the new Public Works Director, to be very high on his list of priorities. Thank you, Homer and John.
First, I want to thank the staff very much for presenting us with the full budget. If you recall, last year we just got Q and the general fund to look at. For me, it's a lot easier to understand the complete picture when I get to see the entire document in one sitting. Also, I want to thank the staff for sending it out a day early. That helps a lot when you're reading 640 or some odd pages. A couple comments. I was disappointed that there wasn't more work being budgeted for the collection system for next year. I understand the need to be conservative with the use of cash, but hopefully after the city gets the feel for the reimbursement flow from the SRF loan, that they may be able to free up some funds to go ahead and bring forward some of those collection system issues, specifically the main and Highway 41 pipe connection that everybody's been complaining about for a decade. And finally, I have an idea for restoring the general fund reserves. In the budget, in the risk management fund section, it mentioned that the fund balance is a little bit less than $1.8 million. And as recently as less than 3 years ago, the city's finance director, which I had a lot of respect for, her analysis ability, determined that $500,000 was a suitable amount of money. And in the budget, it stated that the city during the next year was going to revisit that analysis. I would suggest they do that now rather than sometime next year, with the idea being that if 500 or 600 or 700,000 is deemed the appropriate amount to be as a balance for the risk management, that the balance could be transferred to the general fund reserve and basically make it whole in one swap. Anyway, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Homer. Katie, I'm going to ask again about the general fund emergency reserve. On page B14, it shows it as $1,766,000. And that's actually about $490,000 less than what you showed in your 10-year forecast that you published a couple months ago. So I'm wondering, in the caption for that number is general fund emergency reserve only. So I'm assuming that there's been some amount, close to $500,000, that is being retained in a general fund operating reserve. Is that the case?
No, I think this is going back to the question of how the general fund reserve has been defined historically to include some of the internal service fund reserves. So you'll remember.
No, that's not it. The number that you published in the 10-year report, the 10-year forecast, was $2.257 million. And that matched up with what we calculated when we deducted all of the internal service numbers from what you published in the annual report. So that 2.257 million number is actually a good number. So I don't know how it ended up being 1,766,000, but somehow there's something being deducted there.
And you're referring to the 5-year comparative balance page?
Yeah, B14, yeah.
So, John, my recommendation is that you give me a chance to go back and try to compare and contrast those documents.
Okay. All right. So I guess the other question then would be, is it intended that at the end of the fiscal year that everything that's in the general fund that has not been spent or encumbered goes to the emergency reserve?
Yes.
Okay, so there is no separate general fund operating reserve?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
In my experience, unique to Morro Bay.
Okay, all right. And then the last thing is I was looking into this ARPA issue and the guidance that they've released, and I guess they haven't really released it for what they call non-entitlement cities.
Correct.
Morro Bay is. But in the guidance for entitlement cities, the National League of Cities, in their frequently asked questions, says that the money can be used for stormwater projects.
I was going to grab my 155 pages and show you where it's marked up. I mean, I've read all that apply to cities. I didn't read the parts that apply to tribal jurisdictions. And they specifically call out street paving, but they do not specifically call out anything other than water, sewer, and broadband from a capital projects. So,
right. And I think that the National League of Cities was interpreting that that sewer component to include stormwater collection. So, for what it's worth, that's their interpretation.
Yeah, and what I get concerned about is 5 years from now, when somebody goes and looks at what we've spent the money on, when FEMA comes back and audits us, or Treasury Department, I'm sorry, it's not, this one's not FEMA, but when Treasury comes back to audit us, I propose that we be very careful about using somebody else's guidance or FAQs or whatever they are, because I don't want the city to be on the hook for an expenditure based on the National League of Cities versus what the Treasury Department says.
Sure. And then the other thing in regards to purchasing vehicles, I've just heard that there are issues with supplies right now because of chip shortages, and it's only going to get worse, and prices are escalating quickly. Is that an issue for the city?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, there's specialty vehicles for the most part, police and fire, code 3 type of vehicles. So I don't know the answer to that, but we can certainly look into it and let you know what the scoop is.
Okay. That was all I had. So is there any public comment or questions on this item? Anthony?
I do not see any raised hands in the queue, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any further discussion of this item?
Donald Hedlund just raised his hand, Chair. I'm going to go ahead and try to unmute him.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
You are unmuted.
Yeah, welcome, Donald.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Good evening, advisory board members, staff. Donald Hedlund, 30-year resident of Morro Bay. I'd like to address the new sewer treatment project. Under subsection 7.2, permitting activities, starting on page 99 of the staff report, it says that the city is working with the Division of Drinking Water at the State Water Resources Control Board to obtain a variance from the typical pipeline separation requirements due to the width of the trench for the conveyance facilities pipelines and the limited right-of-way for much of the alignment. The plans already show this and have been approved by the city engineer. On sheet G18 of the approved project plans, it says that the owner, or the city, will secure the DDW waiver prior to the issuance of the notice to proceed, and the contractor shall comply with the provisions. The notice to proceed was issued by the city on December 14, 2020, as the report indicates. The contractor bid the project this way, so it is permissible to proceed according to the plans, or will there be another delay as the project waits for the waiver from DDW? That's a question. Also, under subsection 7.2, permitting activities on page 100 of the staff report, it says that the stream bed alteration agreement from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife will be obtained in April 2021. Question, did they obtain it? On sheet G18 of the project plans, it says that the owner will secure the SAA, or the stream bed alteration agreement, prior to the issuance of the notice to proceed, and the contractor shall comply with the provisions. Again, the NTP was issued by the city on December 14th, as the report indicates. Has the contractor done any work within the CDFW's jurisdiction already and without the SAA in hand? Is this causing a delay, and will the contractor be filing a claim because of an owner-caused delay again? Is the city and its consultant, Carollo Engineers, acting responsibly with this publicly funded project? Again, under subsection 7.2, permitting activities on page 100 of the staff report, that makes mention of the State Historic Preservation Officer, who is the director of the State Office of Historic Preservation. This officer is a person by the name of Julianne Polanco. Has there been cultural features or artifacts discovered that have already caused delays to the contractor? Thank you for listening. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Donald. We're going to let the engineer who will be presenting on the next item answer those questions for you. This particular item has to do with the draft budget, so we'll conclude this item unless there's additional discussion or comments from our committee members. Barbara, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Hey, just one quick comment. I want to also note on page 55 where Katie said they're going to eliminate the funding for the OpenGov. I think that's a smart move. We had talked about that 3-4 years ago when we were doing our citizen-friendly document budgets and had a public workshop. But I know myself and maybe other CFAC members have asked during the past year, what's the usage on that? And I'm glad you were able to get that data, Katie, because if the average usage is 10 hits at 30 seconds or 10 seconds each, then it's not being used. And if it's requiring staff time to update that because of maybe an incompatibility with the One World system, then I think it should be eliminated. So I know it's a small, low-hanging fruit, but thanks for finally for getting to that, and I'm glad that's going to move forward. Oh, by the way, at least one or two of the candidates interviewed for the position did mention that in our citizen-friendly little pamphlet we did a few years ago. So somebody's looking at our pamphlet, just FYI. Maybe it's just job applicants, but whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, so that concludes this item. Let's move on to the next one, which is item B4, review of the Water Reclamation Facility Quarterly Update Report. And we have a new engineer, Kyle Rohrer, I believe, who took Alex's place. So, and Rob, your name is also on this report. So who do we hand it off to?
This is Kyle Rohrer. I'm happy to take the handoff unless Scott or Rob wants to say wonderful things during an introduction. I'm happy to just jump into it.
I go ahead and introduce Kyle. Hopefully his video works. But yeah, Kyle took over in the lead WARF program manager role after Eric Caceres left the Corolla firm in early April. So Kyle's been with the team. Prior to that, he was involved in the early stages of Corolla's work with the city. So he's familiar with Morro Bay and the project in our community, which set him up in a good position. And they restructured a bit to provide, I don't know how we want to typify, but Eric was serving multiple hats, and Kyle is an excellent project manager, but we're using more of a team approach as the things are getting more critical in terms of timing and a lot of things moving at once. So we're delighted to have Kyle join our team. He's done a great job in the month he's been here, and looking forward to the presentation and good questions from the committee.
Thanks.
Kyle, before you start your presentation, since we did have questions from Donald Edlund about 3 issues, can you answer those questions briefly before you start into your presentation?
Yeah, Chairman Martin, I absolutely can. And it's a pleasure to meet you and the rest of the committee members. I really wish it were in person. I'm not wild about the new normal, so I hope I can see you soon. So the questions, I have a set of questions actually that came in very early this morning, and then another question by committee member Bart Beckman. And I can address every single one of these verbally. I don't think we probably have the time to do that, but what I don't answer verbally to this group, to those listening at home, I will prepare written responses quite soon for all of them. So the questions that I heard, make sure I have it right. The first question had to do with the Department of Drinking Water, the variance we're requesting. First of all, as the citizen pointed out, it is for pipeline separation considerations. This is not an unusual variance to request from DDW, and we're also close to a mutual acceptable between the parties solution that is most likely going to involve mitigation and monitoring. That's the current. We've been back and forth with DDW, and we're really close to having an understanding on what's going to happen without having to reinvent the wheel, if you will. So that's the DDW issue. There was also a comment, I believe the caller was asking about the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Is that correct? Was that the other question?
Yes, it was in regards to the stream bed alteration agreement.
Right, okay.
The contractor has had to do any work in that area yet.
So the Department of Fish and Wildlife had 60 days to comment on the approach, and I see Rob clicking on, so he might have something to add to this. And the 60-day review period has passed, and so on the conveyance part, we're clear on that. For the wastewater treatment plant itself, All we're waiting for now are comments on the riparian enhancement plan, and those should be forthcoming. So, Rob, do you have anything to add to that?
No, you got it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And the last one had to do with the archaeological efforts, correct?
Yes, the state historical preservation.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was writing with my left hand, and I'm not wearing my glasses, so I'm pretty much flying this way. So the answer to the question is no. The contractor has not done work that is in any historically significant identified zone. They have not found any remains. There's monitors out there for the conveyance, and there have been some things. There was one or two instances where they did find what they thought could be an artifact, and they followed the procedure. The monitors shut them down and turned the trucks around to make sure that what they had was not an artifact. We are currently working. I have an item on this on my presentation that we're currently working to develop a scope for a very sensitive part of the conveyance that is going to go through archaeologically sensitive areas, and it's going to require more mitigation. But until we have a mitigation monitoring plan in place, blessed by SHPO via EPA, nothing on that part of the conveyance will be disturbed.
Thank you.
Okay.
So you're going to have do a screen presentation for us then?
Yeah, and I know it's been a long meeting. I don't have a lot of slides, and I'll go really quickly. Feel free to interrupt me if you want. See if I can share here. Are you all seeing this?
Not yet.
Not yet? I'm not very good at Zoom. Let's see here. Bear with me, folks.
There you go.
How about now?
Yep.
Yes.
Fantastic. What I don't know if I can do here.
Yeah, if you change that, Kyle, you may lose the screen, so I just sort of move through that way.
Okay, is it okay with this way? All right, thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Again, I'm an expert on 4 platforms. This isn't one of them. Okay, so quickly, this is our update. The recommendation is the same as it always is, for you all to receive the update, and this is Q3 for 2021. Summary project status. This hasn't changed. The current project estimate that was developed in fiscal, I want to say 17-18, of 125,941. The last time we gave you a quarterly report, the total value of 138,591 was the same. The overall project remains on schedule with the time scheduled order requirement of February 28th of 2023. We're still on track to beat that in terms of substantial completion.
No, he has until.
I don't know how well you guys can see this. I have some garbage on my screen that I need to move around. So while the total in Q3 remains the same as 138,591 number, we did have a 5th amendment for the wharf treatment plant itself, which resulted actually in a credit of $194,000. And so what you see is just a reduction in the wharf facility reconciliation amount, and then an increase of the construction contingency we're carrying. The overall number is the same. There was just a little movement among those 2 buckets by a small amount. The expenditures to date, as of Q3, which again, as you all know, is the end of March of 2021, we're at 45.8 spend. The Q3 actual expenditures themselves was $7 million. And again, this is against the project cost of the 138,591 number I keep referring to. Something that we did under the new, as we're transitioning into a slightly different program management team, And this came from a question, I believe it was from Mr. Alexander, got us thinking about this, is that we give you reports that are based on program management's oversight and tracking of the budget. And there was a good question posed that it was difficult to, for lack of better words, crosswalk between the city budget and what we're showing you in our regular reports. So my team and I spent a lot of time, generously provided by Sandy Martin and Doug Harbottle at the city, to really help us get our arms around, what's in the city buckets, and when we go from quarter to quarter, how those relate to what's going on. And I don't want to you don't want me to dive into a bunch of big detail, but just to let you know what we did a few things here, and a lot of this we did in preparation of the upcoming the fiscal 21-22 budget when we were establishing the placeholders for the WRF. We slightly adjusted how many of the funds, the items in the fund are characterized, combining some, eliminating some to make it a more logical connection to how Corolla was acting as a program manager in tracking these same costs. What we really think was of value is crosswalking these specific tasks to actual vendors. And what Corolla did, what my team did, is went through every single invoice from the time Corolla started as your program manager to come up with this crosswalk. So what that has enabled us to do is that moving forward, every time you see me giving this quarterly presentation, I'm going to be able to take exactly what's coming up from the city's ledger, apply them to project components, and show you the same bottom line amount for each quarter. And hopefully that's an improvement that will address the question that was posed to my predecessor prior to his departure. So this was another question that came up, I think during the last quarter, and it's a good one. Why are we behind in the planned expenditures? Well, the simple answer is that we were expecting the conveyance part of this program to be in full swing in Q2, and as you know, there was a delay of 35 plus days, and then frankly a slow start from the contractor. So we are still behind in terms of the spend, but I will say, and Katie made a good point during her remarks, and I'll put an exclamation on that this coming fiscal year is going to be the biggest lift by far for this program. You essentially will have the entire conveyance done during one fiscal year. You'll have a very heavy lift on some expensive components on the facility, the treatment plant itself, and we'll also be going forward to a lesser degree, but moving forward on the recycled water infrastructure of the wells, if you will. So I expect these lines to get a lot closer together in upcoming quarters. The milestone schedule has changed only for the conveyance facility's substantial completion and final completion, which aren't on the critical path for the time schedule order. And again, this reflects the stop order that the city had to give handbook instructors for 35 plus days, and then a recalibration of their schedule to overcome their their slow start. So this report is designed, as you well know, is intended to cover the third quarter, which ends March 31st of 2021. But in all the work that we were doing to support the city and developing the new numbers for the WRF, including our program management costs and the infrastructure itself, we did a complete bottom-up approach, starting again from the construction to the program management to everything, to figure out what the spend is going to be, as opposed to trending it based on schedule and schedule of values, we instead started at the very bottom up on what we will know, what we feel will be spent on construction, as well as the program management costs. And so that's not just Carollo and its subcontractors, but it's also contractors that are directly engaged with the city. So from that, we came up with a new anticipated program total of $144,726. This number and this breakdown will be reflected in the next quarterly presentation I give you in August, I believe. But I wanted to give you a heads up on this because it's in the budget and it's something that we want to, give you a heads up on and take head on. So where does this number come from? Essentially $6.2 million rounding, and I realize rounding $65,000 is taking a liberty. I'd like to have a $65,000 rounding, but for simplicity, it's broken down really into these main bullets that you see here. There's upcoming identified amendments in the form of change orders for the plant. There's conveyance archaeological, and this was what I was referring to when I was answering one of the questions from the public. This is the very sensitive area that goes through part of the conveyance that we really have to be careful of and put a lot of effort into. There's additional costs related to program management, which is program management for everyone, for the Carollo team and for direct city contractors. More recycled water facility funds are needed. And there's quite a bit additional construction contingency. And I can dig down into this if the committee wants. And this actually is the last slide of the deck. So maybe I could just take a pause and let you, the committee, let me know what kind of questions that you want to focus on.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. Well, let's go to questions, and we'll start with Bart.
Should I unshare?
Fine. One comment on your presentation that what you're calling construction contingency, I would characterize as allowances. Is that basically what they are? It's contingency if those things potentially aren't going to happen. I understand that there may be a variance on how much it exactly will cost, but those look like real things that are going to be there, so they're really not contingency per se.
I agree with you, and I agree with your assessment of the connotation. Yes, I think there can.
Okay, we go ahead then.
Contingencies.
I had some other. Okay, yeah, I have a fairly significant background in this area, and I appreciate. I'm not surprised at the number. I won't go into that. I had discussions with Scott, so I'm not at all surprised at the 144. Of the comments or the questions I asked, I only want to focus in on one. The current schedule, and I have sort of pointed out on many occasions, it does not show testing of the recycled water. It basically, the schedule shows hooking the pipe up to the injection well. And I contrast this to the WRF, which has a rather extensive list of testing startup items. So it's not as if it's not there. It's literally not there. So how, if we're not going to actually inject the water into the ground, percolate it, extract it, how can we get a permit for potable water?
Yes, and that's an excellent question, and it is solely a limitation of the schedule document. There is, and we're actually, as we speak, we're adding that component. The reason I assume the reason historically that it just showed the ending of that pipe is because there's 15 or 16 months of testing that has to occur before we get the green light to start injecting water and pulling it out and delivering it. And so this new schedule will have that in it. Your question was very good and spot on. There's a number of things that have to occur once construction is complete. We have to make, for the most part, we have to make sure that the water meets all the requirements required under the Title II before we inject it in the basin to begin with. And then there's months long of testing to make sure that the injection and the extraction systems are working fine before we deliver the water. So the schedule really was, it just left off, and now it's continued. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Bart, you're muted.
I brought this up on numerous occasions, but I'm glad to know that the next time I see a schedule, do you have an approximate amount of time that's going to add on to what currently is shown at the end of recycled water to when you would go through all this, get it tested, get it permitted, and then have approved potable water?
Yeah, so if you use the milestone schedule, it's as of this printing, it's pretty accurate that we expect to be the recycled water facility final completion is December of 2023. And that's a full 15 months of completion of the treatment plant itself. So Joe or Rob, do you have anything to add to that? Or Joe, it looks like you're driving.
No, actually I'm not. I'm parked, but yeah, I definitely can add a little bit. But one thing to remember with the IPR permitting and testing is that the permit actually is developed through an engineering report based on our processes. You know, it's very well known what creates safe and drinking water and what we actually have to test for. So the state and the health department will issue us a permit where we'll actually be testing this water as it goes in the ground to ensure that we meet compliance. So there's certain milestones after the IPR system is up and running that we do every single month that will continue for years. So that's how we determine that we are continuously and reliably meeting safe drinking water standards. It's not, the city of Morro Bay is not determining safe drinking water standards based on how our facility tests out. The state already knows what constitutes safe drinking water, and we just have to prove it out after the fact. And it's not a short 1 or 2 week test period. It actually goes on for years.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Ad.
Okay, thanks. That's all, John.
Okay, thank you, Bart. Let's go to Homer.
In Katie's email response to the questions this afternoon, there were 3 questions that the response will be addressed at the meeting, 1, 10, and 11. And I'm hoping that those don't get forgotten. The other, a number of the questions that I submitted didn't get answered, so I'll resubmit them again. But I do have one. Why was the estimate to completion report deleted?
The estimate to completion report?
Yes, old table 3. I'll refer to that as the Bill Bowles table.
Well, just a little background on that. That was actually specifically requested by our committee and then subsequently approved by the council to be included in the report.
Okay.
And it was in last quarter's report, and it's missing from this quarter's report.
And it's just an EAC summary?
Yeah, I think if you look at the last quarter report, you'll see it's table 3. Right. Of all the reports, it's, in my mind, the easiest to understand.
Okay. I will look into that. I don't have an answer on why that doesn't exist in the Q3 report.
And I have one more question, which you probably can't answer, but It seems to me that a lot of the $20 million of additional costs beyond the 126 had to do with things like the snails, the soil slippage, and the archaeological issues that have been identified. Shouldn't have all that stuff been picked up in the EIR?
That was a lot of it. And I will, I can try. One thing I will add is that other thing that's missing is there's a $7+ million increase on the conveyance contract that wasn't accounted for either. That was a big part of it.
I understand that, but I was just finding out the EIR was deficient.
I can't answer that question. I do know from other projects though that the EIR does the best it can. I think ESA, the EIR, does the best they can to do all the surveys to figure out what they could run into. And I do know that in the case of the frogs or the snails, that was kind of a surprise. Looks like Scott had something to add.
Yeah, it was a good question by Homer. We did do the EIR. We did consult with all the federal agencies, Fish and Wildlife, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, had no issues with the EIR, and then they came back after the fact and said, oh, by the way, the frog and the snail. And so it wasn't part of their EIR comments. But nonetheless, since we are getting funded through the EPA had to go round 2 and through their NEPA process, and that's where it got picked up. The flip side of that coin is that because of the delay, we secured, instead of a 3.2 interest rate on the WIFIA, we have a 0.83 or 0.87 interest rate. So the good and the bad that comes with that. And then Fish and Wildlife on the California side, a similar thing where, we give plenty advance notice on what we intended to do with, I don't know, I forget the name of the area, but sort of in the back side of the project for the war facility itself. We had plenty of advance notice what we intended to do, and comments come in at the last minute. Which then further requires more analysis, and that led to some delays from the project getting started, or being able to move things around more efficiently once the project started. So I think our EIR contemplated a lot of it. I think some of the things that we just couldn't know until you start digging around is a lot of the cultural pieces that we're discovering through the pipeline project, which explains some of the increases that are going from the 138 to the 144 million number.
Homer, are you done?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Let's go to Steve.
No comments, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Lois?
Probably more directed at Scott or Katie. With what is now looking to be a 15% increase over the original estimate, is that expected to impact rate? And if not, at what point would it? And then just the observation that the use of that money is lost opportunity costs for other uses that we've previously discussed. So I'm sure the ratepayers are interested in that.
It's a good question, good point. The elasticity is certainly extended by the low interest loans for both WIFIA and what's projected for SRF at a 0.9% interest rate for $60+ million. Provides a ton of flexibility because it just takes what we anticipated our annual debt payment to be down significantly. So the one number we're sort of battling against when we look at cost increases in our debt ratio, we have to maintain a debt ratio, 1.2%, or 120, I should say, in order to stay in good stead with those financing those loans. And when we do a projection out at the 144 level, 150 level, we're still okay. But as you identify, it does take away opportunities to get further along on other One Water projects and or using, cash held out for other uses in the city. So it's one of those things. I mean, none of the added costs are things we like, but they're also necessary parts of the project that, we take our best guess as to what the project amount was going to be when we started in 2018. And as we discover things, that's changed. But yeah, it's a well taken point, but yeah, and our rates won't go up as a result of these projected increases.
Lois, anything else? Okay, Barbara?
No, thanks. Questions just answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just have one that's kind of related. Maybe Scott, you'll know this. Has Cayucos advised the city as to what their switchover date will be?
I just had a tour with their general manager a couple weeks ago at their facility, and they're still sending their effluent to us. Anticipate that occurring through the remainder of this fiscal year. Their hope is to be offline by sometime in June or late June or July of next year. And so I believe we anticipate that in our budget for next year. Obviously have conversations with them about next steps. They still own portions of the property where our existing treatment plant resides, and there's decommissioning and deconstruction costs that are part of that. And so I think there's a lot to discuss with them as we move forward, and that'll be part of the JPA discussions between the city and Cayucos.
Thank you, Scott. Did I miss anybody? No? Okay. Anthony, are there any further public comments on this item?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I do see two hands raised in the queue. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Carol Truesdale. I'm seeing additional hands coming up now as well. Carol Truesdale, you are unmuted.
Thank you. Thank you again for taking my call. Under subsection 1.1.2.2 construction on page 78 of the staff report, it says that 27 trees were removed as identified in the plans. In fact, the actual count is more than 40 so far. The project plans had only indicated 25 trees that were scheduled to be removed, and the EIR had indicated that trees would be avoided. The tree experts who performed the tree cutting admitted having accidentally removed more trees than they should have. What are the consequences for having done this? Question. Need to get the record straight and an explanation as to why the mitigation measures were not in place in order to protect those other trees. The mitigation measures listed on sheet G-18 of the project plans, so it shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone and the environmental monitor hired by the city on January 12, 2021. To enforce these measures is who wrote them for the WR project EIR in the first place. How many more trees are going to lose their lives because of this project? My question.
Thank you, Carol. Kyle, Scott, I don't know who's best equipped to answer these questions, but I
can start, maybe Scott or Rob, if you can follow up. According to the latest, the permit allows for 36 trees to be removed, and to date, 27 have been removed. I wasn't aware of comments made by anyone in the field removing trees. I do know that there's been confusion on a definition of bushes versus trees, because there's stumps out there. But to our knowledge, only 27 of the 36 allowed have been removed. I don't know, Rob, if you have anything beyond that.
That's my understanding also. I think part of the confusion might lie with the definition of, how large a diameter constitutes a tree. And typically it's, 4 inches at 5 feet above the ground or so is what would constitute a tree. And I'm not sure if that is the issue with one of the subcontractors saying that he actually removed more trees than allowed. But we'll have this as a point of discussion during tomorrow's conveyance construction meeting, I'm sure.
Thank you. Anthony, the next person.
Yes, Chair. I see Larry Truesdale with his hand up. I'm going to go ahead and unmute him.
Thank you. Welcome, Larry.
Okay, Larry, you are unmuted. Go ahead. I'm not seeing any action from him yet as far as unmuting. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next individual if that's okay. Actually,
hello?
There he is now. Go ahead.
Didn't fully understand. I had to unmute several things. Okay, on the second page of the quarterly report for March, professional individual and their registered civil engineering license number had been provided on this page in the past reports. As we know, that was Eric Caceres, PE 73351, who at the time was employed by Corolla Engineers in Fresno. It appears the new program manager, Kyle Rohr, is not licensed as a registered civil engineer in California. So is there a licensed engineer in responsible charge over him? If so, who might that be? Who at the city oversees Corolla Engineers? That's it.
I am not an engineer. I am serving as the program manager, and my direct supervisors are, yes, they're all registered in the state of California engineers.
And I oversee the Corolla contract and direct oversight of Kyle's work. We'll, as our new public works director, Greg, gets his legs under him. We'll probably look at if that may shift over a little bit. But of course, we also have a Wharf Council subcommittee consisting of Mayor Heading and Councilmember Jeff Heller, who have some oversight. We have the CFAC board, we have the PWAB board, we have city council, but ultimately, the direct report at this point is to me.
Anthony, do we have any other public comments?
Yes, I see 3 more hands raised here. John Weiss, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
John, welcome.
There you are.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's been a while since I've addressed one of the public meetings, and I'd like to welcome Kyle to the fold of Morro Bay. He may not be aware how passionate I am about the conveyance and the route that was selected. I think everyone else up there probably is pretty well aware. But I was noticing in the report under subsection 6.2.2 and hours of planned lane road closure on page 97, it says that the current closure on Quintana Road will be completely closed to through traffic 24 hours per day with no pedestrian access between early February 2021 and the middle of May 2021. And of course, we are nowhere near that. And the question is, and this is something that I battle with, is just the accuracy of the projections of the closures. I mean, as recently as May 3rd, they closed 1 lane of traffic on Quintana Road, but that was apparently testing, but nevertheless, the lane was closed. So it impacted all the businesses in that general area. And then we got a report on dated May 8th, and they were going to start May 10th, and which is probably the actual pipeline part, but it's, I just want to express my frustration that we need more accurate information. I know that Sarah and Paul are doing their best. So I'm not trying to criticize anybody's integrity, but it seems like maybe the information they're getting on a daily basis may not be up to date. And then one other thing is that the PR firm had committed to updating Google Maps, and I just happened to use my home address to go to ASAP, and it still has me going down Quintana Road, which of course is not possible. It's closed before it gets to that point. So I'm not sure if it's some of the businesses are getting identified on Google Maps, but if we're going to commit to doing that, we need to do all the businesses that are affected directly. And, those are my main concerns. I do happen to be a business owner, and I can talk to you offline about that, but, I'm just very concerned about it. So thank you very much. Hope to have some answers on the accuracy of the time, and also have Google Maps up to date. That would be great.
I can just provide a comment if it's appropriate.
Yes.
We struggled with that section, Mr. Weiss, that you're referring to in the report. We struggled with it because we knew when we published the report that information was out of date, which is why we added a disclaimer in there that said this information was provided and was current as March 31st of 2021, as opposed to just taking it out altogether. And I will also offer that that we share and understand your frustration in getting timely information about closures, and it's probably number one on the list right now of what we're trying to work closely with Anvil and with CATS and just to make sure that is improving. I think it's improving, and I appreciate your comment, and we're going to keep trying to make it better.
Thank you, Kyle. Anthony, who's next?
Yes, Chair. I see Kristen Headland next. Okay, Kristen, I have unmuted you. There you go.
Kristen, welcome.
Good evening, advisory, board members, and staff. Kristen Headland, 30-year resident here in North Morro Bay. For the record, I would like to ask a few questions regarding the new sewer project. On April 7th of 2021, the Estero Bay News reported a city water line was broken. The newspaper notes Mr. Mueller stating one of the backhoe operators hit a water main and the pipe was broke. He added that the water line was marked in the street along with other utility lines, and that the company had yet to tell the city why this accident occurred. This was noted in the Estero Bay newspaper that was released with the date of April 22nd, 2021. I had a few questions. Why did the accident occur if these lines were marked on the street for the operators of that backhoe? Has the contractor told the city why it happened? Can we, the residents, get some answers? What precautions is the contractor now taking in light of that accident? What was a report written on this broken water line? Can it be posted on the city's website under the sewer project? And for the 5,400 gallons of water and the 1,100 gallons of sewage spilled, I had another question. We don't understand Mr. Mueller's comments noted in the Estero Bay News on page 14 about it being redirected to a manhole. Where does it go from this manhole? Did it go out to the ocean? I would like to know that also. Also, I'm alarmed that the sewer price has jumped an additional $9 million. Before the 218, the citizens were told the project would cost $126 million, and now we're at 144, and you could call call it 145 million. At what point do we run out of low interest loan money, and how much will be in the contingency reserve account? I'm a long-term resident here, and I have some concerns about the increasing price of this sewer project. Thank you very much for answering my questions. Have a great meeting. Thank you.
Kyle, are you familiar with that sewer pipeline breakage?
I am. I think Joe is actually there and may have a more direct answer. I can kick it off. The contractor hit a line that was being used as a bypass on the sewer that was actually above ground, and hit it with the tine on the forklift. And like the caller said, I think it was around, there was a report made by law immediately, and I think it was about 1,100 gallons. As far as the water line, which was up the hill, if you will, I guess east, it was marked, and it was hit. You know, these accidents do happen. And I think Joe I can speak to what was done. That was early on in Anvil's work on this project, and I was notified immediately and got on the phone. We got on the phone with the construction manager and basically said, we need to have Anvil considered having them have a safety stop. Anvil did that on their own. To regroup and make sure that wasn't something that was going to happen again. And we also requested that they provide a plan on how they were going to prevent future accidents like this occurring. They also brought in additional crews, more seasoned crews from other parts of their organization to kind of do a reset, if you will. In terms of the specifics of the comments made to the press, I'll let Joe comment if he doesn't mind.
Yeah, speaking directly on the sewer leak, we contacted the Office of Emergency Services and Placer County Department of Health. We were able to redirect that flow, as the caller said, into a manhole. It's an actual sewer manhole, so we're able to capture over half of that flow and send it back into the system and back to the sewer treatment plant. We did all our analysis and tracking, and we're able to factor up a portion of it also. And we consulted with the county and Office of Emergency Services, as I said, and determined that no sewage or wastewater made it into the bay.
Thank you, gentlemen. Anthony, do we have one more?
I see two raised hands left here.
Okay.
Chair. So Linda Donnelly, go ahead. I'm unmuting you.
Welcome, Linda.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, commissioners. So I would like to talk about some financial in Table 18 on page 92 of the staff report. Under summary of reimbursement requests, the difference between the amount requested and the amount approved is roughly $6 million. So what funds cover the unapproved amount? That's my first question. And then again, on table 24, on page 103 of the staff report in note 4, under WRF performance measures, it says that $8.5 million has been moved from contingency to the GMP, leaving $600,000 in contingency. What will that be enough to cover the future contract change orders? In Table 5, it indicates that there are 9 more pending change orders. those are my two questions. Thank you.
Kyle, can you cover that?
I was just refreshing myself with that table that she's referring to. So what that footnote reflects is movement of contingency cost for the prior amendments. And that's just construction contingency, for lack of better word, that's allocated to the wharf itself, not the overall program. So what we try to do is break up the contingency into the program element budgets. The direct answer to your question is we don't believe that is enough contingency, which is why the Q4 report I'm going to be presenting to you, that I gave you some advance look at in the presentation. I should say adds. I think the number's I can't do it off the top of my head because I don't have the slide open. 3.4 million, I think, to address exactly what the caller is commenting about, because there will be necessary, contingency or allowance, however you want to call it, necessary for the WRF for a couple of things going on, namely change orders and the soil slip. The Q4 report will reflect that new contingency assumption.
Okay, and then her question about the unapproved SW or the planning loan submittal.
So Rob might be the best person to address that. I see he came on here.
Yes, so we're in the process of working with the state board staff on submitting reimbursements. Reimbursement, I believe it's number 3 for SRF, was partially rejected, and they've asked us for backup on a bunch of the items. So they are going to be processing about half of that reimbursement request immediately, about $4.7 million, about half of that. And the other half we have to provide additional backup information for, and then resubmitting that as a additional reimbursement request. A lot of questions on these reimbursement requests are missing receipts and backup that need to be submitted to justify that reimbursement.
Thanks, Rob. Can I just add that I defer to Rob on a couple of these issues, as they've especially this reimbursement request situation is because they were prior to the new program management team, if you will. So he has better historical knowledge. But what I will offer the committee and the audience is that we've been in very frequent contact with the SRF folks to make sure that we're completely aligned on the proper way to do these requests and make sure we have adequate backup, especially as we move into construction loans. So we're making sure that our expectations are being managed with SRF and the city team.
So, Rob, I think specifically her question was in regards to, since that reimbursement hasn't been received, what funds paid for those costs? And I think the answer is it came out of the sewer operating fund, out of user fees. Is that correct?
That is correct. So we expect to be reimbursed for that amount. It's just it's going to take a little bit longer than. So these are all reimbursements. So the contractors and consultants have already been paid out of the city's cash, and then we get reimbursed through the loan proceeds.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Anthony, do we have another person?
Yeah, we have one more raised hand. Gayla Newman.
Yeah, we have one more raised hand.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Gayla Newman, and I'm a resident of Morro Bay. I live right at the intersection of Main and Quintana, right above the signal light. So I'm getting a firsthand look of a lot of things that are going on these days. I can just stand at my front windows and watch the work and hear an awful lot of things, especially all the work that's being done at the lift station next to Limos. But here are my questions. On table 1 on page 79 under water reclamation facility, and again on page 102 under project challenges of the staff report, it mentions the recent rain event from the late January and the soil slip. So was any report prepared and sent to the agencies such as the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board? If so, where can one find these reports? Is there an estimate of what this might be costing us? Under conveyance facilities in Table 1, on page 79, it indicates that Far Western is to conduct investigations on cultural resource boundary required and delineate CA SLO 16. When will this action be scheduled to be performed? Is this delaying the pipeline contractor, and will it result in another contract change order? Thank you.
Chairman, you want me to go ahead and take this?
Yes, please.
Sorry, should have waited. Oh, yeah, sorry. So the rain events and the soil slip, those weren't reported to regulators. They weren't reportable events, if you will. The reason that they're contained in that table is because they're a basis of change orders from the Felix Black and Beach JV teams building the treatment plant. They're entitled, under the contract, they're entitled relief under significant rain events, which they have documented in their change order request. Same with the soil slip. The soil slip isn't reportable to the agency, to any particular agency, and is the basis of another negotiated change order that we're working on right now with them. The most current update I can provide you is that the city representatives and the JV constructor currently are working on potential solutions for the mitigation. And once we have those, we'll move forward with costing them out and assigning responsibilities for payment. The last question, that's kind of a two-pronged question. The cultural resources that Far Western is doing are those investigations I alluded to earlier in my remarks through the very sensitive area of the alignment. And those services have not been contracted yet because the dollar amount of those services is going to require a solicitation by the city. The way that the schedule is set up for the conveyance contractor, there is no delay anticipated from that work that's going on out there. And I think that was it on the question. Yes. On that question. Did I answer it?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Gayla. Anthony, are there any more folks who'd like to ask a question or make a comment?
Thank you, Chair. I do not see any raised hands left in the queue.
Okay, thank you. So that completes this item. Thank you, Kyle, for your report. And we have a very little bit of time left. The next item is the quarterly investment report, which Katie has provided for us.
I can make two quick comments. One, thank you so much to the people who participated. I think we thought we're here alone. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in the project. The other item, Kyle, you might want to think about the purpose of the project report if it's a historical document or something that's going to help us understand what's happening going forward.
Thank you, Bart. So do we still have Katie with us?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Okay, Katie, I just wanted to make sure you're there in case anybody had a question about your quarterly investment report. I don't. Does anybody else? Okay, seeing none, then we can just say, looks good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And future agenda items. So we're looking at August 17th. I guess we'll have the quarterly WARF report, the quarterly investment report, the work plan development, and I can't think of anything else. Is there? We won't have any kind of a quarterly budget performance report, right?
No, I don't think that there may be, the director may provide some insights into where they're going with the year end, but it won't be ready for then.
Right.
Yeah.
So is there anything else then for that meeting?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll be able to squeeze that into 2 hours.
You had a meaty meeting today.
Okay, well, it is now 5:40, so unless there is anything else.
Thanks for your time, and thank you very much for the warm welcome, and I've really appreciated having the opportunity to work with each and every one of you. You've made the city staff, and you continue to make the city staff better at doing what we do, and that's a tribute to your volunteerism, so thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Best
Katie.
of luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.